Hello everyone, this is PKL Entertainment and we are back again and we're going to talk football now. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'm sure most of you do, Manchester City have been banned from the Champions League for 2 years, and they were also fined 25 million for breaching serious rules of club licensing and financial fair play. The news broke late evening on Friday 13th, and the whole football world is talking about it. All the serious implications. Why did this break out? And yeah, we're just going to cover quickly really what it means for Manchester City in the long run. Now, I know one of the biggest issues or the biggest talking points people have raised is, what does it mean for Pep Guardiola, right? Because the Mansours, they brought Guardiola in. Yes, I mean, great to win domestic titles, etc. But they brought him in primarily to win that Champions League. That's the sort of holy grail for all football clubs, okay? And we all know the amount of money that Manchester City have spent, crusading to get that trophy. And you think about it, last year they were quite close to doing the quadruple. They won all 3 domestic trophies, and they got to the semi-finals of the Champions League last season with Tottenham. With that, we had that late disallowed goal from Raheem Sterling. You could debate on whether it was a handball or not. So they weren't that far away from winning all 4 trophies, and everybody kind of felt this was going to, continue a spell of major domination for Manchester City, and eventually they would just get that Champions League trophy. Guardiola's had success at Barcelona with getting a Champions League, but every club he's been to since, he hasn't been able to do it. So he couldn't do it with Bayern, and he couldn't do it with City. So hypercritics will always put that against his mark. But if he can't compete in the Champions League for 2 years, you kind of have to think, how long will he stay? Because the problem you've got is that a lot of his established players will be coming towards the end of their contract or nearing the last stages of their contracts. So we know that David Silva, for example, this is going to be his last year. I've read that Sergio Aguero is near the end of his contract, and a couple of other players. I think De Bruyne, for example, as well, has only got a year or 2 left on his current contract. So if the players want to play in Champions League football, they may not want to renew their current contracts at Manchester City and look elsewhere, and that will obviously have a downturn effect on the club and Guardiola's ability to attract players the following year, right? So if they can't play in Champions League football, which is what all footballer wants, all the top elite footballers, how is he going to build a team to be able to instigate another assault on the trophy? Now, we know they've got Real Madrid, I think it's this week, midweek, coming up. So you have to think, really, he's got to try and make the most of it now, or if they fail, will he want to stay another 2 years? Because it's not it's not easy winning that Champions League for City anyway. And not only that, as we've seen this season now, they're no longer, this season they're no longer going to be the top dogs. Liverpool are clearly, the champions or champions elect, however you want to put it. So he's had to concentrate next season on one hand on bridging that gap to catch Liverpool, right? As well as now trying to find a way of getting players to stay for the next couple of years. Plus, how is he going to attract future players going forward to make sure that he's got a good enough squad to challenge on both fronts for the Premier League and the Champions League, right? He may look at it and think, I've won all these trophies and I can't do anything more for the next 2 years, right? Trying to overcome Liverpool, might be something that interests him, but in general they've already won the league a couple of times, so there's nothing new for him to achieve there. So he may not want to stay and do basically in what's another rebuilding job. The other issue people have talked about is how many players will stay, how many players will go. So players that are at the end of their contracts, yes, they may struggle to keep them, but players who have 2, 3 years, 4 years on their deals, they can't get out of those contracts. It's not as if this is the normal situation where a player has 6 months left, and then there's other teams interested in them, so they kind of use that as a negotiation tactic to try and get more money. You know, if a player has a long-standing deal, right, they can't all of a sudden turn to the Man City and say, well, I want out of my contract because you're not in Champions League football anymore. You know, they still have to play, then fulfil their contract terms. So I think the people that are on longer term arrangements with City, I don't think that's much of an issue as the people who are coming to the end of their contracts. Okay, so the obviously from the league standpoint now, I'm guessing fans of Sheffield United, Wolves, Everton, Man United are all excited now because it means now an extra spot on the Champions League spot places now. So City is second at the moment, I believe. Leicester are third, Chelsea are fourth. I believe Sheffield United are fifth now. So yeah, it's all up for grabs. I'm not even going to say Arsenal because from a fan perspective, I don't even think Arsenal are anywhere near it. So you could ban City and Leicester and Chelsea, and I still think Arsenal just wouldn't be able to manage it. So I'm not even going to talk about Arsenal now. But yeah, it does create an opportunity for the other clubs below them to get that spot. And yeah, how interesting would it be if Sheffield United got in there? You know, what a turnaround if Everton managed to nick one of the spots. You know, what a great sort of run that would be for Ancelotti, having just recently taken over Everton, who was sort of veering off into the more relegation spots when he took over. And now look at them now. They potentially can get Champions League spots. And all the United fans I've seen have done plenty of trolling over City. You know, they've now got an opportunity to get into the Champions League. They're still in Europa League, so they can get in through that way. But I'm sure, you know, they're reveling in this from obviously the rivalry between the two. But, you know, I feel you should always look at your own team rather than what's going on with the others. But yeah, so that's the other ramifications. And of course, where we're dealing with breaching of financial relegations, where it's possible that false accounting information has been provided to UEFA, from a domestic point of view, the Premier League will have to carry out their own investigations, maybe review the information, the data that Man City have provided them, and have to sort of double check it, triple check it, to look for any sort of anomalies in there. You know, if they found anything wrong with the data that City is provided to the Premier League, would they then have to implement some sort of points deduction? You know, if UEFA have gone this far, which is what you know, if it's a severe ban, a 2-year ban from the Premier Club competition, the Premier League, if they did find anything wrong, would have to implement something equally as strong. I mean, what could we be talking about here? Maybe a 10, 15, 20 point deduction. Maybe next season you start off negative 15 points, negative 20 points. You know, we all know fines are just, you know, that's just a drop in the ocean. 25 million is nothing to City, you know. So it's going to have to be more severe if the Premier League find anything out. So it's difficult to talk a lot more because you're dealing with the club's account. So a lot of this stuff is confidential. So it's hard for sort of all the newspapers to go into explicits on what they think could potentially go wrong. I'm sure people within the football industry have some sort of inkling of exactly what details could have been gone wrong and the sort of sums that may have been reported. I know I read a couple of articles in The Guardian which they said there were leaked emails from a German newspaper that might have alerted UEFA to this investigation, and it's been an ongoing thing. So City were trying to fight it for a while. They made a statement, didn't they, saying that they kind of expected the outcome, but they're going to appeal for it anyway. So we'll see what happens with that appeal on here. If we go to the statement, yeah, it just basically states that Manchester City have been banned from all UEFA competitions for the next 2 seasons and fined 24.9 million for serious breaches of UEFA's financial fair play and club licensing relegations. So an adjudicatory chamber of the club financial control body CFCB found the Premier League champions guilty of serious breaches of the UEFA club licensing and financial play regulations. Um, we go on to say that basically City overstated their sponsorship revenue and its accounts, and the break-even information submitted to UEFA between 2012 and 2016. So we know that the big initiative behind the fair play was to stop the dominant clubs who had the foreign ownership being able to outspend their rivals and spend more than what they were bringing in, trying to bring a sort of parity and level the playing field with clubs who don't have foreign ownership and can't spend the amount of money. That was the whole thing behind the financial fair play, and there was always a cynical attitude towards this because we were always hearing fair play, fair play. We want to stick to fair play, right? But we were always getting reports that Man City are under investigation, or Real Madrid are under investigation, or Barcelona, and nothing really came of it. So everybody kind of felt, well, this is all just them saying they want to do it on the surface, but beneath that surface, no one's really getting picked up for it. Well, now they have, and my initial thought was City will appeal for it and possibly get it overturned. We've seen previously before, other clubs have had transfer bans. Barcelona have had transfer bans and managed to get them overturned. We know that Chelsea recently had a transfer ban as well. So the problem you've got here is that UEFA have to eventually make an example, right? They have to make an example. Can you imagine if they got this overturned? So they've come out, they've announced, right, we're hitting them hard, we're going to ban them for 2 years, and then all of a sudden City appeal and then it gets overturned. It's going to make UEFA look soft, right? And people just won't be able to take them seriously anymore by any further sanction or any further sort of ban that they threaten any other club, because they'll think, well, just do what Man City did and just appeal the ban and then you'll get it overturned and you'll be okay, right? We always think, despite their putting forward as fair play statements, that the big clubs will never get punished, because you have to think about it. Footballers in general, you need big clubs participating in the Champions League. You need your Bayern Munich, your Man United, your Juventus, your Real Madrid, etc., etc., because that's what attracts interests from the crowds. That's what draws in the sponsorship deals, the TV deals, right? Can you imagine a Champions League where we had none of the big teams involved, and it was people like, I don't know, Schalke or St. Petersburg, and those were the main teams at the forefront. With all due respect, nobody wants to see Champions League final between Schalke and St. Petersburg, right? They want the big teams involved. So I've always had this attitude that they will never really punish the big clubs because they need them in football, right? It's a bit like World Cup. You always want the big teams there. They changed the Euros to have more teams qualifying because they want the bigger teams involved to therefore bring more interest into the tournaments. So it's kind of had the same feeling here. We always thought they would never really hit them this hard. So they can't really go back on this. City, of course, will appeal, and maybe they'll be able to claim some sort of loss of earnings. I've seen here articles. They could lose anywhere from potentially 100 to over 300 million in Champions League earnings from this. Many people stated that Liverpool earned over 100 million for winning the Champions League last season. So there are some statements here saying that with the prejudicial process, however, the club will pursue an impartial judgment as quickly as possible and will therefore, in the first instance, commence proceedings with the Court of Arbitration for Sport at the earliest opportunity. So, yeah, of course, they're not going to hang around. They're going to try and hit this head on because, again, it affects them from a brand, from a club point of view, from an earnings point of view. Obviously, less Champions League money and, again, less ability to attract more players going forward for the next 2 years. So it's just going to be interesting to see what comes of this. I'm sure in the future coming weeks we'll get more and more information as we go on here. There's going to be much more articles, but I think going forward, the speculation has always been mainly about what's going to happen to Guardiola. Will he stay? Will he not stay? And what would this mean for other clubs? Because you've hit one of the big kind of elephants now. So this is another reason why I think UEFA kind of have to stick to their guns as much as they can, right? Because that's serious stuff. This isn't just a transfer ban. This is saying you cannot participate in a club competition for 2 years. So, some serious things have been done here. So other clubs, I'm sure, now will be going over all their books and all their accounts again and again and again. I'm sure there's going to be major overtime being worked at various other clubs to making sure all their accounts and affairs are on the up and up, because they don't want to have what happens to them happen to City. So, there's not really a lot more that can be said right now. So I will provide more coverage as we come along here. I hear some people from various clubs saying it's about time, and this is safeguarding the future of football. And I just think people from various clubs just got to be a bit careful. Don't be so quick to sort of come out and sort of abuse City, because who knows who could be caught up next. And without being too speculative here, we all know there's stuff goes on behind the scenes in football. There's always some sort of let's say ways of working the system. It's not as blatantly out there, as let's say boxing. I think football tries to do a better job of trying to cover stuff up than what boxing does, for example. But yeah, we all know things go on in the background and behind the scenes, and this is just throwing up a massive exposure of it all. So it'll be interesting to see what City do. Obviously, any sort of big loss is going to put Manchester City on further under the microscope. How will this affect their performance going forward? Are we just going to see them just tailed off now? Because the league's over, they're not going to win the league, right? And they're not in the Champions League next season. So you could look at it and say, well, the Premiership pointless. It's pointless now, isn't it? I mean, I know they still get prize money for finishing in certain positions, but again, when the Premier League do their investigations and come up with their own conclusions, will we see sort of recovering of that prize money along with points deductions, right? So City are kind of, if you're a player, again, you're kind of thinking, well, this season in the league is practically over. We all know they've got the League Cup final soon against Aston Villa. They're still in the FA Cup, I believe. And of course, they've got the Champions League still to win now. So this may, if you like, rally them together. And we'll show you. We'll just go out there and try and win this Champions League to try and put out a big statement. Can they beat Madrid? I think they can, yeah. They've got a good shot at it. It's going to be a really good match coming up on there. So we will wait and see. But I'll give you more details and coverage as we find out. I just think it's just worth leaving the speculation there until we find out more details, figures, and disclose information that will sure to breach out in the future. More articles that will come out in the future. But that's what I think for now. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you happy about this? I'm sure many United fans are going to be happy about this. I mean, Liverpool fans, do you really care? I mean, you've got the league wrapped up, so that's all you'll be bothered about. As I said before, the clubs below them, your Sheffield United, your Evertons, Tottenham, you're all going to be very happy that this gives you an extra place to try and challenge for the Champions League. But that's it for now. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll provide more news on this in the future. And take care for now, and see you soon. That's it. Stop. Good. 20 minutes done. Good.